Okay, so this is the regularly scheduled Fairfield Economic Development Commission meeting of Thursday, September 1st, 2022. We're meeting in the second floor conference room of the Old Town Hall, as well as via Zoom. I'll maybe for our purposes or our guests, I'll let the commission members introduce themselves. Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development.
Kevin Lesko, Chairperson of Economic Development.
Stephen Rosado.
Tom Colburn.
Go ahead.
Justin Beck.
Eddie Hockhauser.
Beverly.
Beverly Ballas, President of the Chamber of Commerce.
We also have
Jim Wendt, Planning Director. Good early morning to you, Adam.
Evelyn Harrigan, Assistant Planning Director.
Gretchen.
I'm Gretchen Gertner, longtime secretary.
Yes.
Would the folks online also
appreciated.
like to introduce themselves? I have Mary Alice, my very capable marketing coordinator, is there.
Good morning.
Waving.
Morning.
Morning, Mary Alice.
Adam and Rory, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm Rory Jacobson. I am helping Adam out here on this project with FHI Studio, planning consultant.
Morning.
Hi, everybody. And I'm Adam Texa. I'm with FHI Studio, and I'm the project manager for this POCD update. And a little early out here, I'm really excited to talk to you all and have this opportunity to get some input on this POCD.
Perfect. We also have, joining us via Zoom, I see Matt Rappaport, commission member, and Don Peterson, who is a former commission member, Commissioner Emeritus. So welcome all. With that, I'll turn things over to you, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to make a few comments.
I'm gonna keep it very brief, Mark, because there's a lot to look at. I want to welcome everyone again. It's really great to see so many people here. It's like we're giving up summer and we're back into fall, unfortunately, right? So, I'm gonna just kind of go right into the minutes. If there was an opportunity to read the minutes, if there's a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Excellent. And seconded?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, excellent. I'm gonna push it right back to you. I'm excited to hear what we're gonna hear.
Okay, well, maybe I'll let Jim introduce our guest speakers, presenters. You heard from Jim earlier in
Yep.
terms of our plan of conservation development update, but we have further presentation today and hopefully get some input from all of you. So, Jim.
Good morning. It's nice to be back. I was with you, I don't know, a couple meetings ago where we made an introduction to where we may be heading. Today, I'm gonna scratch the surface a little bit deeper and dive into a little bit deeper detail of where we've been. And then I'll turn it over to Adam to help us have a conversation of where we might want to go. So if Mary Alice, if you can cue up the slide deck, I'm gonna take maybe 5 minutes, hopefully, and recap some of the details of some of the outreach that we have done previous to now. And you can just jump right to the next slide. And you all know, I think I might be preaching to the choir a bit here in terms of what a POCD is. But it's essentially a goal and policy document. It's an aspirational document to help set the tone for what our policies should be for economic development, land use policy in particular, going forward for the next 10 years. It's not a set of regulations, but we are hopeful, and the goal here is through regulation to implement the plans or the recommendations that come out of this plan. And we can go to the next slide.
And we should mention too that that's what our scope of work with our consultant includes: finishing the POCD, updating and reformatting our zoning regulations, and then helping us to integrate some of the policies that were developed within the updated POCD into those zoning regulations, so we can kind of close the loop.
Excellent, thank you. So we, and many of you participated in these workshops prior to our COVID pandemic. We had a series of very successful and well-attended workshops where we wanted to test out what the public appetite was and comment on three main topics. and we can go to the next slide, and those were largely centered around the topics of conservation, economic development and housing, which we're gonna focus on today. In infrastructure, we had tabletop exercises where folks really got down with maps and gave us some great feedback. What did we get out of it? What did folks say? So on the next slide, you'll see on the right, the graphic is, we had maps that highlighted all of the existing commercially zoned properties in town and asked to a series of questions for table discussion. And on the left is a list of the written feedback in the reporting out that we received in terms of some of the things that people wanted us to consider. And some of these things should not be foreign to you. You've all been promoting these ideas all along. One is to extend the streetscape improvements beyond the center to other areas, Kings Highway, Commerce Drive. There is, and the commission's been talking for some time, to how can we reimagine or reexamine that stretch of the post road that lies between our historic downtown and Southport. There's that piece, in front of Exide that's a very developable site that we all want to see developed. How can we connect our historic commercial downtown to Southport with an extension of commercial activity that makes sense? There was a lot of support for a hotel use in town. I think we can all agree that we are underserved in that capacity, and hotel use would be great. We always see this come up in public feedback that rooftop bar and dining seems to be a popular thing that people want. There was support to significantly increase density of commercial development downtown. We've been talking about the possibility of increasing residential capacity down there, which I think there's support for, as long as we have a solid core of commercial first floor. And I know this commission offered a letter of concern with respect to an application that we have pending before the commission that's solely residential. So we're looking to try to strike that good balance. There seems to be support for some more specific design standards, because I think what we have found is how a project looks and feels is more important than the specific numbers or perhaps the criteria. If people know what they like when they see it, but the specifics of height and density may not be as important as how something really fits in to the character of the community. I'll skip to the next slide. We specifically asked questions surrounding the topic of transit-oriented development in two areas downtown in Fairfield Metro. And I'll talk about Fairfield Metro first. On the right is, I think that we have found through our previous planning work that there's much broader public support for more development in that area of town. We have had some success in some initial projects there, and some of the other items that people wanted to see down there. Interesting that there was a constituency of folks that wants to encourage a geriatric hospital down in the Fairfield Metro. I think that some of that stems from, residual fears that projects that aren't senior related are going to be a detriment to our town services. With respect to downtown, there's a constituency of folks, primarily the Taxpayers Association and the certain constituents within the Strategic Plan Committee have been lobbying for a public-private partnership to do a air rights project over the downtown parking station, to do something more down there. When we floated that idea and some concepts in our planning work, it was very mixed reaction. Some folks are very, very concerned about the density that's already there in terms of the school traffic and other multifamily residential that's down there. Others think that can be accommodated, and if we do a structured parking facility there, it could create footprint to do something on a tax generating basis. So as I've said to you before, it's the trick is trying to find the right balance between economic growth to help offset taxes and overdevelopment. That's that crucial. What's the sweet spot? And that's what we're looking to try to find.
I think we could also say too that, you know, with these residential developments, you know, if there wasn't such a great need for them, they wouldn't be filling in so quickly. And so, you know, we're really still seeing a lot of market pressure to, you know, kind of look at our regulations, figure out how we can do better mixed-use projects that both pencil out and, you know, would contribute to, especially in the metro area, a very kind of walkable, great neighborhood. So, you know, we're definitely getting those pressures through inquiries that we get through the office. So it's definitely something that we realize we need to kind of look at more deeply.
And we have all seen the larger multifamily projects that have come online recently lease up very quickly. And so that just solidifies the great demand there is for rental product out there. On the next slide, there's just some other incidental things that people wanted to talk about, and people support the idea of more pop-up events, maybe areas for food truck events. We do already have a nice array of summer things at the Green and Fairfield Theater doing some community stage events. Certainly the priorities that folks like, they love, are walkable downtown, pedestrian scale, street fronting retail. That's what folks want to see continue. There was some support in those little, if you see little check marks there, that means those are comments that were repeated by other folks. There's some support for an up north commercial village up near Sacred Heart in the former GE site to help support convenience activity up there. And so that's just kind of a snippet, and we'll go to the next. We believe, as I think you share, that housing, diversifying our housing stock and increasing housing and housing in general, large-scale housing, is in fact economic development, I don't think without any question. There was support, and the commission already has moved forward to allowing detached accessory apartments in our larger zones. We've recently revamped that opportunity so folks can do a detached unit, and made it easier for folks to do an attached unit in their house, even with an addition. There's a lot of folks that would support cluster housing. We have discussed through our conversations with the Affordable Housing Committee options to increase the ability to create more housing than our current regulations provide. So we're talking about maybe revamping our regulations to allow a greater base density in some cases, to give investment opportunity and a chance to find a middle ground between what our regulations permit and what I'll say is the nuclear option with an 8-30G affordable housing application. So we're trying to have some conversations about what's the right density. Obviously, in the middle of that page, there's a picture, an aerial picture of the Exide property, which I think we all agree would be a good site for mixed-use development. And what's the right balance and opportunity there? And is that kind of a linchpin piece that might help a strategy to connect that downtown Post Road center to, transition into Southport? So that's kind of a really quick view. I'm happy to get into that in more detail, but at this point, I think I'd like to turn it over to Adam to discuss how we take some of that early feedback that we received and where we might go with that in our planning work going forward. So with that, Adam, I'll turn it to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. So, as Jim has sort of noted here, this engagement was great. And really, I think established a really good foundation for a lot of the work we did. But it definitely happened at a different period of time. COVID has really changed the business environment for a lot of people. People are still trying to figure out what their relationship is to sort of home and office and what that actually looks like. And I'm curious from you all, after looking at the slides that were sort of just presented, are there things that you saw there that you felt like, hey, these still really remain true and we need to continue to sort of focus on this? And at the same time, are there things that you think maybe have changed or new conditions which may have arisen that we need to start to think about, as a result of COVID, or just, quite frankly, a changing economy?
Adam, I'm curious to hear your input on because of the post-COVID, the desire for people to use less office space. So therefore, that portion of our rental market or investment market is waning. But then there's also the other side to it is the desire for experience-oriented businesses, people going and doing business, whether it's restaurants or other services that are decidedly experience-oriented. Can you comment on that and how before we were looking at it maybe a little differently and where we are today with your recommendations?
Yeah, I can. I think that you're calling attention to two things. The office market is, as you sort of point out right now, really soft, and a lot of people are projecting that to be pretty soft. There was a lot of overbuilding of office even going into the pandemic, and you start getting even 5 or 10% of people who might be working from home on a regular basis, and you just need a lot less office space than you previously did. And I think you're right to sort of focus on experiential retail. I think one of the things that we're seeing kind of coming out of the pandemic is, people, when they couldn't go anywhere and couldn't do anything, were buying things, and they were bringing them, and they were getting them delivered to their homes, and they were purchasing more products, and they're going back now to a long trend that has been in sort of movement for a long time, is more experiential retail. So a desire to want to go and have experiences and pay for experiences over paying for products. So I guess my question back to you all is, are there areas in the town where you think that, hey, there's a real ripe opportunity for us to be, doing more experiential retail, or sort of bringing in more of that active sort of on maybe what has been identified in the PowerPoint?
Can I ask a clarifying question? So how large is like an experiential retail business? And I ask this because right now in our zoning regulations, we have certain square footage caps, for example. And I want to make sure that if that's kind of a new commercial model that we need to look at, that we're not excluding that within Fairfield based on how we regulate.
Wow. May I ask, what is the purpose of having square footage caps on retail? So I don't know that there's a valid reason for that. I would argue that there's no need to have a square footage cap on retail.
Let the market
And it very much depends on the retail, the experiential retail we're talking about. We're currently in conversations, as you know, with a brewery, restaurant, entertainment venue that is looking at a 25,000 square foot facility. It could be that
It's
large.
under our cap.
Right. It could be that large. But some of the other things that our regulations don't tailor to, along those same lines, and we've had conversations about a great movement, in the last decade or so, craft breweries, craft distilleries. Our regulations treat that as manufacturing industrial use and is allowed in only very specific areas of town. Fortunately for us, it includes the area around Fairfield Metro Center Station. But, a lot of towns have modified their regulations to permit, those on a smaller scale in the downtown core. So it's not your traditional manufacturing operation, it's more, it's different in nature. So that's something I know we've talked about. I think we were anticipating maybe amending our regulations to allow for that in concert with a specific application or use for a site. But, maybe it's time for us to look at whether or not we should, take this opportunity to provide more flexibility within our regs, to signal to that industry that, we are in fact open to those possibilities in locations where, it makes more sense.
do distilleries fall outside of, I know there's different regulations for distilleries versus breweries. But is that state regulation?
Well, there are obviously state liquor laws that, but we do have, it is regulated, you know, there are land use regulations that obviously pertain. We don't really, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, it's considered a manufacturing type use right now. So,
It is, but as Mark said, there's opportunity to change that. And as Adam is suggesting, what do you folks feel about the idea of supporting a brewery type or distillery type of use? And if so, are there areas of town where you wouldn't want that to be?
by show of hands, how many people would like that?
I know it's a little early in the morning, but are we thirsty for such a use?
That's right. Well,
No, I've read time and again where distilleries have a much harder time finding sites and access to open restaurants and adjoining with those things.
Yep.
And I've read it's mostly state regulations that they're trying to overcome, but they could expand significantly, and if Fairfield was more welcoming, that might be more of an opportunity and make it just more of a destination town where like, hey, if you had 2 or 3 distilleries where they have tasting rooms and restaurants and other experiential stuff.
You're right, the regulations aren't the only impediment. We've been in conversation with a craft distiller for quite some time, looking at locations downtown. The issue is mostly about finding the right site, and the right price point for these types of uses, but there is a regulatory component to it as well, which we shouldn't over. So, you know, there is that component. I know, you know, like Middletown and other communities have amended their regs to allow it in their downtown business district. You know, that might be something that, you know, to your point, in terms of experiential retail, type, there are obviously others. Another one that we've had a lot of, less so recently, but, you know, escape rooms and things like that, different type of experience, but again, our regulations and not so much land use, but there were other regulatory impediments to allowing for those types of uses. You know, those are the type of things I think you're touching upon.
Well, people will pay up for good experience.
Right.
You know, as opposed to retail, if it's a shirt here or a shirt here and you get it online and it's the same shirt, they're probably gonna go get it online for the 20% or 30% savings, as opposed to what they can gain for their experience.
Ken?
How is the zoning code written that prevents an escape room from occupying the traditional retail?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was
What's in the
the,
code?
Well, an escape room, I don't know, is the best example. We would consider that like a retail use.
You would, it would fall under retail category, whatever use group retail falls.
Correct. We've got kind of I had a conversation with Adam about this a couple of weeks ago. There's kind of we have an amusement device, regulation that goes way back to the 70s when, if you recall, when, the highway, the I-95 service areas were occupied by Howard Johnson's rather than McDonald's, and they put an arcade, in those places, and the kids after school became like trouble in River City. All the kids were hanging out in the arcade and shenanigans was going on there. So, but that whole industry has evolved into, virtual reality type of things, which presently may run afoul of our amusement device regulations.
So is this a matter of, changing the text of the code, or are you going to add just, brand new use group categories to the existing code?
Well, both. I
maybe-
mean, that's the opportunity we're looking to see what there's an appetite for.
right.
That's kind of what I wanted to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm looking into that.
Oh, I apologize. I did want to jump in on this because this is a question, you know, a lot of towns have moved to sort of more general use categories and been a lot more strict, we'll say, on sort of the design standards for uses across all of those uses. Is that something that this group would sort of support, is a little bit more, you know, I heard earlier sort of like there maybe not necessarily need to be as many sort of caps on square footage, but sort of more general use categories, broader use categories that would allow for, you know, essentially the commercial development to evolve, you know, without having to constantly update the zoning ordinance, but then to provide sort of stricter design regulations for commercial uses. Is that something this group would be interested in exploring?
I think that's what Ken was touching
Yeah.
upon.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably hold
So,
true here.
an example, I
More
do.
flexibility.
Exactly. So an example, I do a lot of work in New York. I'm a retail broker, so I kind of know this stuff. And I do a lot of work in New York City, and I've done a lot of work in Connecticut. And New York City, for all its, troubles, has an incredibly broad use group category, which allows what is considered neighborhood uses. And it's a broad category, and almost every use is as of right. And if we can move toward a much broader as-of-right category with, with some protections, whether it's, in terms of noxiousness or impact, I think it would allow the market to figure out what's best use for that space. And also serve as a destination retail, such as a craft brewery, or a neighborhood retail, which is a new, let's say, dry cleaner, or even a new restaurant that pops up. So I think a real broadness of the retail categories, but obviously some restrictions on noxiousness and impact.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and I think what goes hand in hand with that is another thing we're gonna be looking at
Yeah.
more broadly is our parking requirements.
Yeah.
One of the difficult things, one of the biggest impediments from somebody changing from one use to another is, now we're gonna require more parking for that.
Yes.
And I think there's a broad, or a much bigger opportunity to both reduce the base number of parking spaces we may need to demand,
Correct.
and also, and we've talked about this, before, particularly with respect to restaurants, is potentially equalizing the parking for restaurants to that of retail. So if there's changeover, because almost every single restaurant that's come into town in the last however many years has needed to go to the zoning board of appeals to get relief for parking, which they have broadly granted. And if we total up all of those variances, to me, speaks to a demand to reduce our parking requirement.
So if there's the opportunity to clear path to approval through, a clear path of regulation, and also a clear path to reduce restrictions, you're gonna get more looks from retailers and quicker grand openings, which they both want.
Is there, to this topic of conversation, right now, our regulations provide a whole litany of uses that fall. They describe, and if it doesn't fit within those categories, then it's not permitted. So we're really talking about broadening that
Right.
and eliminating that and going the opposite direction, which is, unless you're explicitly prohibited or excluded, consider it as of right, that type of thing. I think that's what
Yeah.
you're talking about,
Yeah.
which I think is something that would universally support.
Fortunately, we live in a market, where retail rents are high, right? It's some type of a blessing, so it weeds out noxious uses, right? Just by the price point of entry into the marketplace. And because of the wealth and buying power of this community, only established and qualified retailers are really gonna enter this marketplace. So the market itself is going to act as a regulator in and of itself.
Largely speaking, yes.
I think also too, when zoning regulations were written in the 20s, there were not agencies that were partner regulators.
Yeah.
Who thought through all of those noxious potential side effects, like, your state agencies that are looking out for you in that respect. So I think, if we kind of think through what the potential impact uses are going to be, a lot of times, that portion of the negative impact might be covered by another agency.
But you make an excellent point, and I'll use the example of a tattoo parlor. 30 years ago, a tattoo parlor on the Post Road downtown would have been viewed much differently than it is today. We have two on the Post Road, and either people don't know, or it's not a big deal, because the prevalence of tattoo art has become so broad that it's not considered the, other side of the tracks, back alley type of use. So that's one example of how, evolved.
One
Right,
other,
right.
one other thing before we leave the conversation about limiting, currently, we do have also in our regs, limitations to this topic of 1,500 foot between establishments with certain licenses, liquor licenses. So again, I don't know if that's something that we're thinking about, but largely that was in the past to regulate the number of bars and, liquor stores. You didn't want, a whole street of them, right? So, but then it is also, because of the different ways in which the state licenses these establishments, has, also been a limiting factor in terms of certain types of restaurants, because of how those restaurants are. Now, it hasn't precluded that, it necessitates another step. Typically, you go to before zoning board of appeals. So, there are a couple other things like that that's, kind of a tweak maybe that we might want to think about. I guess the one other broad issue I will pivot a little bit is, currently, as this commission well knows, we have a fairly limited area of the town that is permitted for commercial type uses, 1.5% of our land mass. And, there's really not too many opportunities to upzone or rezone places to allow for commercial uses, but I know this board's sensitive to the impact of that. But, a couple areas we've talked about, one of which was around the entrance to Sacred Heart between the two campuses on Easton Turnpike at the old GE facility. There's been talk about perhaps establishing some type of gateway into the community, which might allow for some commercial applications there. The second was on Kings Highway, where we have, a very narrow, what we find, a lot of our commercial corridors is very narrow. It's just basically the one parcel, one lot off the main drag that's commercially zoned. And typically that does limit commercial opportunities there as well. So I don't know if that's something the commission wants to think about or weigh in or have any comments or thoughts on, but.
Yeah, and I think when that map was created, it was created when there was a population much smaller, obviously, than what it is today, and the concept of deer paths. New deer paths have been established, and they're cut-through roads or roads that might have been residential in nature prior and very quiet prior are not anymore. And so then therefore, really your quality of life for being on that road is not awesome. And, it's not the same experience that it was when the zoning was set up in prior days. Those are areas to me that would be excellent areas to reconsider as some type of additional use, whether it's like professional use, mixed use. There are certain areas, I'll suggest to you that between Commerce Drive and Kings Highway, some of those roads, you could probably do something more or different with. There are flood issues with that, or flood zones, but even that can be mitigated. We talked about that in other conversations. But going back to your concept of adding some depth to those areas of, say, Kings Highway, what was being protected generations ago is no longer needed in protection. These aren't neighborhoods that are quiet neighborhoods anymore. So you probably have a good leg to stand on in developing that. And then there are certain areas that even in other sections of town that are surrounded by commercial, but they are residential. There are a couple of little pocket areas that, there's the stretch that is between Moritz and Judd on Black Rock Turnpike that, it has squoze it into, I think, 4 or 5 residential pieces of property, that behind it is a cemetery. Why would you not consider allowing something like that, connecting that corridor a little bit? No one, there's across the street, there's a cemetery. There's really no one that's going to complain on something like that. And you're going to be able to expand a little bit. And it's, we're not going to have any home runs, but we're going to have a lot of little base hits that's going to push up that percentage by a little bit. And we know that the funds that are generated from the taxes on the commercial, what are they double for purposes of what it generates for revenue for the town? These are things that really need to be considered again before we do final footprints.
Ken,
So as you reconsider land use, especially for commercial density, the type of tenant that we can attract to this is a well-paid white-collar worker. And to get to that, you need footprints of two sizes, a 15,000 square foot footprint or a 25,000 square foot footprint. That's the type of footprint you need of a commercial building, excluding the parking field that's required for such. That's going to attract a white-collar worker into this neighborhood. Other than, say, medical use, or it could be finance, it could be tech, it could be, whatever those, county or fire categories. But those are the footprints you need to build.
Can I ask for clarity? You're talking about 15,000 or 25,000 square feet. You're talking about the property, you're not talking about the building.
No, I'm talking about the footprint. I mean,
The footprint of the building.
the square footage. No, the square footage of the floor.
floor plate.
Well,
Floor
okay,
plate.
okay, thank you. That's, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I just wonder, like, if you look at the Stratfield Village area, like, you'd have to be very strategic where you went after, because like in areas like that, I mean, you couldn't even get past, that was an area ripe for some more commercial development where that market was, and they fought tooth and nail, to keep it as is. So just like, just be very strategic in what you're going after there, and I agree, like, those spots of Pax Judd and stuff, that is ripe for that sort of stuff. There's really not a whole lot there.
But I think even as we've talked about, it's, proximity is everything, right? And for those folks who live in the northern part of town, who have to drive 20 minutes to go get a bagel, right, on the weekend, that's kind of what we're talking about in terms of if we were to introduce a very limited commercial village up by Sacred Heart. Because, people complain about, oh my gosh, there's so much traffic on Saturday. Well, of course, because everybody has to drive south to get to even the smallest convenience, right, on the weekends. To get an emergency, like,
A retail desert.
thing of milk, right? They have to drive so far in order to get there because we've really isolated our commercial corridors. And even for the university students to just enliven that connection by putting a little bit of retail there where they could escape from campus to just, go to a small deli or whatever it might be, it not only benefits the university students and the folks who work there, but it would also benefit the folks who otherwise have to drive so far south. And it's really not going to detract from the viability of the other commercial businesses. Our hope is it, in some ways, might alleviate a little bit of traffic.
That makes a lot of sense.
It actually might even help or encourage and draw in more revenue from out of town. I mean, Easton already comes down into Black Rock Turnpike, but maybe even more so. So revenue from out of town residents into our town, which is always a good goal, right?
But what I'm hearing here is sort of a need to kind of create some almost like classes of commercial areas, where we really talk about sort of neighborhood serving commercial areas, which are really not intended to be, major regional draws, but may pull in from some of the surrounding communities. And then, talking about some of the more bigger destination areas. And it sounds like sort of what I'm hearing at least is that we need to kind of make a little bit more general retail categories, but then also be sort of very specific about what the vision is for some of those sort of key commercial areas are. And then looking for strategic opportunities to expand commercial areas in this, and sort of good ideas around target footprint size, because it really helps to give people an understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about 15,000 square feet and 25,000 square feet. We can start to show people what that looks like and where that might happen.
Yeah, I think you're hearing some interest in some very location-specific areas that we want to focus on, but also
Yeah.
just incorporating greater flexibility into our regs to allow the market to kind of decide some of these things, and also, an attention to design as you referenced, but a focus on, maybe some way in which we can loosen up some of our regulatory schemes to focus on what's really important here, which is how it fits into the character, the surrounding properties, that type of thing.
Yeah, so today I want to make sure that we talk about housing a little bit, because I know it's such an important issue when it comes to sort of the economic development in town. And what I'm a little bit curious about, and what's sort of been brought up before here, is this idea of kind of areas that are sort of either in transition or sort of have substantially grown away from what the original zoning was intended for. And where are there areas where you all think that either sort of new housing typology, where housing could become a little bit denser, and where there might be opportunities for growth, maybe independent of commercial growth in those areas, or as part of sort of mixed use development?
I'm gonna say, look, well, most of the controversy relates to trying to put stuff downtown where it feels out of character and inappropriate. And I'm always thinking, like, why not put it where we have the space, up near the Metro Center or whatnot? There's plenty of room for that, but people own land, own it where they own it. The question I had for you, Adam, more so was, we are, highly unusual. We're leaning much into like this apartment living and rental living, but it was super low interest rates. The pandemic drove a lot of people here. It was a lot of people downsizing their houses and capitalizing on the market. That's all going away to a certain extent. I mean, it may course correct, it may, just level out, but people I know who were planning on selling are not as much so far. And you have all those housing going up or the apartments in Bridgeport, right where the movies were, that are coming online. I'm just wondering if there's density, like, are we leaning into it, like, and we've already passed the wave, or like, it's just a blip?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And if I were 100% sure of the answer for that, quite frankly, I wouldn't be talking to you all. I'd be out on a yacht somewhere, relaxing in the Bahamas, because I'd be having, all the right moves in the market right now. But I think a couple of things that are really important to pay attention to is, there have been long-term trends in the housing market that have only sort of were accelerated during the pandemic. And part of them are structural to the way that, quite frankly, the economy is structured right now. And so there is going to, I think, continue to be a demand for rental housing for a considerable period of time. Access to for purchase housing is very problematic for even young professionals these days. And the need for sort of rental housing, it was sort of underserved for a very long time across the country, but also in Fairfield. So I think you're going to continue to see growth there. I think where we have an opportunity with this comprehensive plan is to talk about the types of residential development that could potentially be built, and really talking about, I'm sure many of you have heard about this idea of sort of missing middle housing, which is talking about sort of multifamily, I put it in big quotations, anywhere from sort of 2 to 20 units is typically what we talk about when we talk about sort of missing middle housing. And that is not the big apartment buildings. It's not big, construction, but it's smaller. Sometimes they look a little bit like single family homes. Sometimes they get a little bit bigger, but trying to open up that market a little bit. What are your all thoughts on sort of that approach?
Before I open up for commission members, I know this is a topic that the Affordable Housing Committee is focused on and is incorporated in the Affordable Housing Plan that was recently adopted. And I think it's even drilled down a little bit further, which is focusing in on the 2 to 4 family units. We do have regulations that allow for that in some of our smaller residential zones, residence B and C. They tend to be really very small residential districts and limited opportunities. A part of the impediment to developing them is parking, and part of it is that they're quite small and so limited opportunities. So I know the Affordable Housing Committee is thinking about this. Oftentimes those 2 to 4 family units fit into those neighborhoods very well, but we just don't have much opportunity to allow for new development of that or expansion of that without, taking a broader look at our regs and our zoning whole. So I know the Affordable Housing Committee is interested in that. To your earlier point, we are starting from literally zero in terms of apartment type living, wasn't really part of our market, for a long time. There was some apartments, but certainly not the type that we've seen come online recently with the Anchorage and Trademark. We have more amenity-rich, transit, oriented type, multifamily rental housing developments, and I don't see that dissipating anytime soon either in terms of demand. But I do question whether or not there's as much, how deep is the upper end of that, rental market? You're getting some fairly high, rental rates per square foot, and people are able to offset that. And, part of our current regulations allow for or require developers to provide, a certain percentage of those units to be set aside as affordable. And that's coming out of, their development pro forma. We'd like to see that increase, but, there's a point in which, that doesn't become as economically viable. So, those are a couple of just overarching, but I know we've focused on the Fairfield Metro Center area. We have projects in the pipeline, and that's an area that we've designated for higher density development, more limited opportunities downtown. I think part of the concern we've had with, the applications present is as much related to the overall design and look of it as opposed to the type of project. I mean, I think there's, some agreement that we could use some additional residential downtown as long as we have some commercial on the first floor, particularly on, high visibility, high traffic locations, things that front the post road or on major thoroughfares. We want to, make sure that there's a commercial set aside for that. I don't know if you guys have any other comments on the residential piece or mixed use or.
Looks like there's more of those going up. The one at Black Rock Turnpike in Tungus went up, and it's, that's probably 20 units.
20 units, yeah.
The one that's going up at the base of Black Rock Turnpike there, right in the interchange. I see more and more of them, and certainly, like, I'm over in the Stratford area, there's a ton of two families going up all the time. And some even three.
We are seeing more and more, interest in commercially zoned properties that aren't on the post road, like Sherman Street. We've seen the former, Hanson's Nursery property, or the medical building that was next to the former Hanson's property, convert to 9 units of residential. That same developer is looking to do 9 more units. So we're seeing more pressure or more interest in commercially zoned properties that aren't seen in this market as viable commercial opportunities, seeing multifamily residential. We've got, 2 applications in Southport. The zoning board of appeals just saw 250 Pequot Avenue is a commercial property that is transitioning towards residential. So, there is, and I agree with, what Adam said more nationally and what Mark said, more locally, is our transit-oriented development studies, there's a real depth to the demand for rental. The question is, how do we harness that, and put it where folks find that to be, appropriate?
Can I ask one question so I can understand this a little more? So, what seems to be a great place to put lower scale, mixed-use residential, commercial, retail bottom, residential up top would be where on the north side of Old Metro Station. Right, south side of Metro Station, where Archie Moore's is, and I think I've got that restaurant, 65 degrees or whatever it is. If I own that restaurant club, and I wanted to change it to a different development, what does the code allow me to do at this point?
In downtown?
Yeah, at that site, what's that restaurant, 90?
No, our snapshot view of our current code would allow you to do a 50% mix of commercial and residential. 5 stories, no more than 2 stories of residential, no more than 50% of the total floor area of the building. Our transit-oriented development plan has recommended that the commission tweak that to eliminate the 50% cap and the 2-story cap, reduce our height from 5 stories to 4, require first floor retail, specifically if it's on the post road or other streets that we need to identify, but then just not have a density, because the state has already eliminated the minimum floor area for a residential unit. The market will dictate.
Great, okay.
what that unit should be.
Gotcha.
We just
So-
never implemented it.
Right, so the market just hasn't.
That's really the struggle we've had with the application that the commission is now faced with for a solely residential project.
Right.
We've been talking to that particular property owner that we think that that's a prime site. Do some ground floor
Yeah.
retail, and then 2 or 3 stories of residential, and I don't think we'd have a problem.
Right.
Our current plan recommends moving in that direction.
Gotcha.
We just haven't implemented that change yet.
And am I also, as a property owner, am I allowed to buy the adjacent properties and combine into one site?
Oh, absolutely.
You can, there's nothing permitting.
No, that's just,
That's encouraging.
Great, awesome. And another question, has that been master planned? Like, right down to the detail of sidewalk finishes, street furnitures, anything?
Not in downtown.
no. We have specific criteria of what, in the Commerce Drive overlay, in that study, there's streetscape features. I mean, it's not drawn, it's prescribed.
Right,
We would require sidewalk, that's prescribed, but street furniture, no. Depth to the street, yes. Mix of use, yes, but we're looking to change that, to allow a greater opportunity for
Gotcha.
residential.
is that something that should be taken upon? Would it induce more development in that area? Because I think that is, X marks the spot in terms of mixed use there and transit development.
Mhm.
Also to increase the walkability of downtown, also to add more retail space because you can't add it on Post Road. I think, if there is an opportunity to kind of master plan that entire thing and just sell the vision to, 2 or 3 developers, I
Yeah, I
think
think-
that might jumpstart a few things.
I agree. I think it's a little bit more limited in terms of opportunities than Metro, but I do think that at a smaller level, smaller scale, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And for all the reasons just stated. I think one of the things we have to take a look at, obviously, is parking, which we've identified. And we do have architecture design standards downtown, but they should be strengthened. I think, to the extent to which we can eliminate a lot of uncertainty on the part of developers and provide a clear direction as to what we'd like to see happen, I think that's very helpful to the marketplace,
So if I own that property, and right now it's just sitting there as a restaurant, it has limited, economic use to me. But if I can do something now greater, me as an owner may wanna do something more, like what, the developer's doing on Umpqua with his, single-story, retail spaces, and he's doing something even larger.
Yeah, and I think, the nice thing about some of these things is they could be offsetting, use, demands in terms of parking and other
Yep.
requirements.
And it may be a
That's
great,
been always the issue with mixed use. The other thing I don't know that we do a whole lot of is, in other areas, again, there's more of a focus in terms of the transition between, higher density, commercial applications and your residential, and it's not as, other parts of the country, I think, manage that transitional process a little better than we do. And, that's probably because we're very old. So a lot of this stuff has been built out and we're trying to, fit square peg into round hole sometimes, so. But I think if we can focus on some of those things, that would be great.
can I ask one more question? Sorry, are air rights available on the open market? Can I buy air rights?
Right now, not in our regulation. You're asking about transfer of development, right?
Yeah,
Not right now.
that's something that is an opportunity.
We haven't developed them within our regulations, and we would have to think through where landing sites make sense.
Yeah.
Usually when you do a transfer of development rights program,
Mhm.
you're really thinking about where you want to target those things, and it's very specific. So if you're going to transfer it from one area, you're really pinpointing where those development opportunities are going to occur.
You're creating an
So it's
entire
almost-
district.
In my experience, it's usually a very specific corridor study.
Yep.
To Mark's point earlier, I don't know that we have the depth of commercial to really do a transfer of development.
Or even residential.
Program.
Can we do residential?
I don't know that we need to, as long as we identify the volume that we want to see within these areas. So if we work on the form, I don't know that it's, a transfer of development rights program is really as appropriate for a town that's scaled like Fairfield.
It's probably down the list of priorities.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if I want to buy the development rights from my neighboring lot, I can't do that?
Not right now,
Not
no.
presently.
No.
can I ask a question on this? Are there places where you would think that, so traditionally, transfer development rights has sort of two groups of areas. One is a sending area and one is a receiving area. So the sending area is the place where you're buying the development rights, and the receiving area is the area that receives those rights. Are there sending areas that you think would be particularly interested, where people would be interested or wanting to sell their development rights to transfer somewhere else in the community?
I'm not sure have seen a whole lot of, I mean, I think maybe that's down the road, when things get
Okay.
tighter.
So for
I mean, it's
example,
something to think of.
Fairfield Metro, we have.
Yeah, right.
We have
But-
air rights over the train station lot, so that's
But,
the only example.
you know, I mean, they may be, you know, that may be a future development site down the line as well.
Right,
So,
yeah.
you know, but that's where, like, when I worked in West Hollywood, for example, the reason why
Florida?
that worked, no, West Hollywood, California.
Okay.
So when I worked there were areas on the Sunset Strip that were view corridors.
Yeah.
And so you could take air rights in order to leave that a quasi-private public plaza, so that was places where people could go
Mhm.
and look all the way to downtown LA. You could transfer the development rights to keep that an open space, to make those towers that were adjacent to it much taller. But I don't know that we have the same kind of commercial environment to
I don't think, I mean, I'm sorry to
Right?
cut you off, but what we did was we saw that receiving area, if you will, is the area around Metro, Fairfield Metro. That's the area that we created as the development opportunity.
Right.
And what we did, rather than saying, okay, instead of building here, we're gonna build there, we just created the opportunity, a much greater opportunity than previously existed to attract that development, rather than trade off another location. So I think we've kind of created that receiving area, if you will,
Right.
without having to, establish an area that you'd need to sell.
So it's
to
proved
get there.
successful at Metro, right?
Mhm.
And can it prove just as successful, but not obviously at that scale, at Old Fairfield?
Well, yes, that's really the question. At what level of
At what
density
scale do we
is
want?
that appropriate?
Mhm.
And I think our plan currently says, all right, you can build a 5-story building now. We've only got one 5-story building downtown, 140 Sherman Street.
Mhm.
Let's bring that down to 4. That's more appropriate scale, but require first floor. The trick is, the properties downtown are so small
Small lots, yes.
that individually, you can't really, you need to aggregate those pieces to make,
Mhm.
and that's really the trick, because there's so many players, so many, you know, in terms of the, existing investment that's there, there's harder targets than others,
Right.
but
So, you know, if I can expand a little more on that, so there's a supply and demand. So the supply of air rights can come from, those properties that line, Boston Post Road, US 1, because we want to keep those heights as they are, it's kind of like a view corridor, which can be transferred to, you know, one of the interior lots between Boston Post Road and the railroad tracks. And we can incentivize them further, is that, because there's all smaller lots, if they aggregate large lots above, say, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square foot footprint, then they get into, development right bonus. So now they'll have a larger footprint to spread out more of the stuff, and maybe that, you know, remains a 4 or 5-story building, and you'll have enough for, infill retail.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting idea to sort of, Jim and Emmeline, for us to sort of explore a little bit and think a little bit about, and sort of, you know, understanding a little bit more where areas of growth could be, and, you know, what incentives are necessary, whether they're transfer of development rights or whether they're density bonuses, in order to sort of get some of these properties moving. But I also didn't want to lose this thread that we've sort of had up into this point, which is, you know, a conversation around downtown that is really sort of said, we need to kind of let the market, you know, move a little bit more there, and give some incentives for a broader kind of commercial uses in the area, and you know, really incentivizing residential development, have you all had conversations about sort of form-based zoning and that kind of thing, downtown and, or in targeted areas as a way of sort of making sure that the form and the design standards are there, sort of getting, it's not quite master planning. It's one step sort of back from something like that, but would allow you to have a lot more control over sort of design and form, maybe have a little bit stronger vision for the area without having to have so much control over specific uses other than, for example, requiring there to be, ground floor for commercial uses.
The design and form that you bring up, Adam, I think is a sore spot for people. I think that was brought up also a couple of times by other people. I forget.
Source side. and
Source side meaning that-
People wanna focus on that.
Well, okay, they want to focus on, but my point is that it's an immediate complaint, what's going up on Umpqua next to the railroad tracks, the big gray slab, like there's no style to it. And if it had some style to it, maybe it would have been more palatable, I mean, it's, a lot of people are about visual and about, going back to the idea of the aesthetics as opposed to, they don't even know how many, no one knows how many units are there, they forget. They were told, but now they forget, and they won't remember as long as everything else works. And so, but they'll see the visual of it, and they'll be constantly reminded. So therefore, if we can apply some type of application of what it's gonna look like, if we can hold the feet to the fire for those developers, maybe that would be more palatable for all the people that are gonna be complaining about these bigger developments. The other thing I wanted to also just, maybe just quick question or comment, Jim. These new apartments in general, the ratio for the school use seemingly is way down compared to the rest of the town. Is that a true statement? Can you
It is.
comment on that?
That's, we track every development that has 10 or more units. And annually get and provide those addresses to the Board of Ed. And they give us current enrollment data so we can track how many kids are in those. And it's the last time we did this, I think it's about 2/3 of a kid per single-family house. Because only two-thirds of our single-family houses don't have school-aged kids. Only about 1/3 of the residents that do. We're an aging population. So about 2/3 of a kid per 0.67 per single-family residence, 0.15 for multifamily at 10 or more units.
Really? It's pretty significant, and that's worth really driving home to the population, our town, because I think that's one of the other things that people really will talk about. They'll talk about how it's gonna just really push the limits of our school system, that, of course, every year when our budget for the school system, it eats up more and more of our total revenue. It's a sore spot.
Yeah, we've forecast been for declining enrollment the last couple of years.
Well, that's the,
Until the last 2 years.
yeah, well, I mean, it
And then I think
doesn't,
the last 2 years, bumped in more
Right.
families than most of the,
And part of the rationale,
yeah.
for creating age-restricted or senior housing is to get at that point. Our position has been that there's no need to further limit, the market opportunities there.
Right.
You don't have to create age-restricted housing, the market will decide. If you make them, amenity sensitive to that population, along others,
right.
the market will decide. So you don't need to age restrict into the point of, whether or not these units actually produce a lot of school-age children. I think we have the data to disprove that. So I'm not one that's pushing an age-restricted housing product, partly because there's not as much interest from the development community to do that.
Right.
But also, I don't think you need to do that because, if you look at the population that's, taking the Anchorage or Creighton, a good percentage of those are,
Right.
what you would consider empty nesters.
Right.
Folks without kids and senior folks in their older years, so.
Yeah, but going back to Adam's question, I think the answer is yes,
Yes.
that there's an appetite for clear design guidelines. Because as I said before, what we hear during public hearings and after the fact is that how a project looks and feels is more important than what's actually in the
It's
box.
not articulated as form-based
Yeah,
zone, but
right.
essentially that's what
Right,
people are
right,
looking for.
right, right.
Right.
Design.
So
Those guidelines
can I,
on-
can I follow up on that really quickly here? So, you know, how much consensus do you all think there is around what is the right sort of look and feel downtown? Because there's sort of two questions, right? Like, we care about the look and feel, and then
Now you're struck the nerve, right?
right. So I
No.
mean, one of my questions here is if there is a need to really have a conversation, you know, maybe, you know, more broadly, you know, beyond this POCD, but also, you know, as part of it as well, about what is the right sort of look and feel, and sort of having some conversations about what are the sort of design parameters that people care about, and what are the design parameters that people, you know, maybe don't care so much about. And, you know, maybe it's materiality, maybe it's sort of the design of parking spaces, the landscaping. You know, there are a lot of factors out there that affect how something feels. And I'm wondering what you all think about something like that.
I'll chime in with one thing, which is something that I think a lot of people, at least I talk to, have a feeling of a perception of when you see a building like the one you mentioned on Umpqua. I always think that's where Blins used to be, so I always want to call it the Blins property.
Close.
But my perception and the thing that kind of makes me not feel great about a building like that is it feels like Fairfield is trending more towards a Norwalk or a Stanford rather than, I don't know what we want to be more like, but I didn't grow up in, I grew up in this town, but I didn't come back to live here being a Norwalk or a Stanford. You know, I came to live here because it's more of a smaller but vibrant and very commercial town. It has kind of the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot during our conversation today is, do we want to be a town of 100,000 people? You know, we're 60,000 people. We're like the 9th largest municipality in the state. Do we want to keep on growing to a, 100,000 person town? Is that genuinely, like, I don't know what the answer is to that. And that's more, that's more of a macro question to answer, but,
I would say no.
but you say no, but a lot of our conversation leads me to believe all I see is more, bigger,
But the,
and
but the state is dictating because of certain laws.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
that we have to hit some type of threshold, and
Yep.
let's just presume for
And that
the
doesn't
moment
help.
that they're not gonna move the goalpost. If they don't move the goalpost, then that's what's gonna have to happen, that we're gonna have to do that. I just wanna make a quick comment. We're having a great conversation, and this could probably go on all day, but I wanna be mindful of everyone's time. And we're way past where we're gonna be. Do we wanna maybe try and wrap this up in like 5 minutes? Or do we wanna continue? I just wanna get a consensus on that. I'm okay to stay for a little while
I
longer.
think we should continue.
Okay.
I would like to just make one comment on design. And I agree that it's very, very important, and the exterior look of these buildings are not favorable, I think, from a visual perspective. I think a wonderful example is what Westport did, where Anthropology is, and how they've triangled that whole thing. It's just beautiful, but it's a combination of brick, New England, multi-use, a little bit of modern. And it's upstairs, downstairs, there's a restaurant, experiential retail. To me, that would be so beautiful on the Exide property. I think, I don't want to see a brewery there. You can put a brewery wherever you want. And also, speaking of breweries, have we oversaturated? I mean, there's breweries everywhere now. I mean, is there a future statistic on that?
there's actually many that are going out of business these days because there's
That's
an economic change in that.
And that
What
whole
people want,
dynamic, I'm actually just tired of them. I'd rather see a winery, but how do we do that? I'd much rather see that. But I think the designs are important, and I think it does alleviate concern if we're going to continue to build housing. If someone looks at it and says, look at how pretty that is, You know, it kind of does take away the angst of bringing in more buildings.
There's an intrinsic value to have like a cohesive look to it, like opposed to, like you come to some of these towns and it looks like a mishmash. And if you go from the traffic circle into Bridgeport, I mean, there's a lot of good restaurants and stuff there, but that's a mishmash, you know, and it feels different, more like you're Norwalk. And I know what you mean, like, my brother lives in Norwalk, but.
There's nothing wrong with those places.
There's nothing wrong with those.
And that's not what I meant by that at all.
No, but you love going downtown because it looks cohesive, it's like it's one place, and people, like, you know, if I have friends visiting, like, it's so charming, you hear all those sort of words, but it's an intrinsic value that you get by having that cohesive look and standard, and I don't know how you regulate that.
I don't either.
Well, I do know the answer to that, so I can kind of help you guide that. I mean, I do think what we're hearing is a direction more towards something that would be form-based in design. I mean, you're not going to obviously change those areas overnight. But this is something that we can talk a little bit about because the town has sort of two tools that are at its disposal to encourage sort of evolutions in the built form and design. One is sort of the regulatory side, and that new construction side of things, or the redevelopment of a site. But also there are opportunities to provide incentives to business owners and property owners to make improvements to their properties that are sort of more consistent with an overall design vision. That works is through sort of like low interest or no interest grants or loans that property owners can access if they meet certain design standards or if they make certain improvements. There have been a lot of towns that have used like facade improvement programs very successfully. Investment in things like and having a consistent set of streetscaping standards that new development can adhere to. So if you're putting in a bike rack, if you're putting in a bench, if you're putting in new lighting, you've got a set of standards that everybody is using. And so that helps to build a lot of consistency over time. So we can talk a lot about it, but it also sounds like, you know, getting back to this is that there's a kind of need to balance this sense of like, growth is good. You don't want to put a cap on growth, and in some ways you can't because of the state regulations. But at the same time, you don't want Fairfield to evolve out of what, you know, a lot of people, you know, either move to Fairfield to get, or sort of grew up understanding, which is not a sort of Bridgeport in that way. And thinking a little bit about what are the qualities of Fairfield that really need to be emphasized as some of this growth occurs. Is that sort of an accurate statement?
That's accurate.
Can I also summarize, I think, some of what we heard in the winter workshops and what I'm hearing you guys say without specifically saying it is that, you know, South Norwalk evolved in the way that it did from the built form because it was formerly industrial.
Yes.
Metro Center was formerly industrial. So the exterior and the volumes and the, you know, the materials that are used there are more appropriate based on its industrial history. I think that what we heard in the winter workshops was that downtown did not have that history, right? It was very New England based. And so we heard in those winter workshops, as much as you guys are expressing today, that the form, the feel, needs to maintain that heritage in a different way, so that the design package that you're looking for at Metro Center can be entirely different because it was industrial. What we're looking for is something that is infill appropriate in downtown that meets the feel, New England feel of what downtown is.
You
And
got
that's-
it. Go ahead and do that.
That's specifically what we heard.
And also,
Good,
yeah,
good.
I think, Boston Post Road is a great test district to do that. I mean, if there is one word I think everyone mentioned, that's charm.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to maintain that charm, doesn't have to happen at the Metro District, because that's not charm appropriate, but certainly along Post Road, definitely, and all its, you know, kind of radiating streets.
Yeah, I just wanted to say too that, you know, when you say don't want to be Newark or Stanford, are you saying that in the sense of total population or overall height and massing of buildings,
I think
or a
both.
combination of all?
I think both.
I don't think that we can be.
Yeah,
We don't
it's a
have that
different
in
look and
mind.
feel.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that we're not looking to do that either, and I think what that Adam has said to us in the past that we need to emphasize when we get out into these public engagement sessions is we're not looking to change, 90%, 95% of the town is gonna stay and wants to stay the same as it is today. So we're not looking to globally, erase what's there and start from scratch. We're looking for how do we target investment opportunities where they are, where we think they're the most appropriate and make the most of that without changing all of that other 95% of the town.
The town is incredibly successful.
So-
That's what it does.
So that's, easier said than done, but we're not looking to, lay waste to everything that's there. We're sensitive to that. We know what people love about Fairfield, what makes Fairfield, and segueing, within the next couple of weeks, we're gonna be rolling out an online workshop that gives the public the opportunity to articulate that, to tell us, to reaffirm. I think we already kind of know, but we'll reaffirm those things, those fundamental, social, cultural, spiritual, whatever it is that people feel about town, to kind of capture that and make that the base of how we want to move forward. So within the next couple of weeks, we're going to be rolling out a virtual workshop to help collect that.
Part of the message, though, is people want to hear that, like, you're still going to be able to go downtown and not be like at Stu Leonard's where there's 4 lanes of traffic.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't feel very charming, if you will.
Right.
And when you talk about what you're proposing, it feels like without saying it, that's the next step. We're gonna have, a traffic cop, and you're gonna have a farm right next to the highway, and I think if you don't have that message, the assumption is, like Colin is, and that's because that's what I was thinking, like, if we keep going,
It feels
that's
limitless.
inevitable. That's
Yeah,
inevitable.
you're right. What we want to try to do is, how do we best capture those opportunities that maintains all those characteristics that everybody loves so much?
I think alleviating
And
that and
I just want to jump in here really quickly here, because I think this is really important. What I'm also hearing from all of you is that a select number of projects, maybe they're 4 or 5 projects, can sort of have an outsized impact on people's perception of not only sort of what Fairfield is, but where Fairfield is going. So when people see, 1 or 2 new projects that look really out of character to them with the rest of Fairfield, the sort of perception is like, oh no, things are going to go out of control. We're going to get way, this town is going to change significantly, even though, in reality, 99% of the parcels are going to be as they were, 10 years ago. And so I think that is something to really pay attention to, is that, small projects can have, sort of outsized or oversized impacts on people's perceptions about where the town is going. And so those first couple of projects coming out of a new master plan and zoning ordinance are going to be really important in helping people understand what is the direction, that things are going.
Adam, and Rory, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us, Adam, especially, from Colorado. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your time away. Sorry to take
And the rest of your day, by the way.
I got all day, exactly. I got all day.
Your day's young, so that's great.
Thank you.
But I want to thank all of you, Jim, Emmeline, again, for joining us
Yes.
for this, it was a very good
Yes.
conversation. I know we're over time.
Yes.
I will follow up with all of you with regard to providing a few updates, on a couple of items I know that's on our calendar. But in the event, that any of you, Matt, Justin, others here, didn't have an opportunity to contribute, if you have any other observations, with respect to the topic at hand, feel free, and that goes for all of you. Send them to me, and I'll be happy to pass them along to Jim and Emmeline and to the team at FHI Studios. But this is an ongoing conversation. Really appreciate the input today. I think it was a great conversation, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
I agree, and before we leave, just to emphasize, there will be additional opportunities, like I said, this survey that's rolling out, and as I said last time I was here, it's important, the role that you guys play is important to the Planning and Zoning Commission, because they need feedback as to if we're heading in the right direction, and if we're not, tell us. If we are, then a little backup support goes a long way to help them over the hump on a new concept. So, we really appreciate your, participation today and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beverly, Beverly, do you have any, quick updates for, the chamber?
We've got our big, harvest market is coming in on October 15th. It's a big community-wide event, so you'll be seeing advertising on that. And Santa will be coming to Fairfield, the day after Small Business Saturday at the end of November. So those are the big two community events that we have coming up.
Super, thank you. Gretchen, thank you so much for the overtime. I think, did you need to borrow some more papers? Okay, great. Again, I think we'll just, we'll forego the formality. I think we'll
I know.
adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we're
Thank you all.
adjourned. Thank you again.